So today, I'd like to talk a little bit about shadow work. Hey guys, so roughly 2 weeks ago, I shared a vlog about some of the plant-based and alternative types of therapies that I look forward to expanding or exploring as new to me in my mental health aspect of self-care. And I think for today, something that I want to talk about is something that is already employed within my wheelhouse. It's already part of my system structure, and that is shadow work. Now, I know for some that sounds like I'm talking about some sort of Buddhist mindfulness or maybe some witch's practice out in the woods somewhere isolated, but it's something that is hitting more and more mainstream conversation from when it was given its formal name by Carl Jung, a Swiss psychiatrist and psychoanalyst. He is known for many things in the field of psychiatry and I think psychoanalytics, but he is, I think, most notable in today's culture on the topic of shadow work. Now, shadow work is something that a lot of people will associate a lot of negative things. They tend to say it's associated to angers and fears and rage and things that you don't want to bring the light to. And while that is arguably true in some of those cases, it's not, the shadow self is not a negative, like a be-all end-all negative aspect of who we are. It can also be a place where creativity is gone to explore, where our imagination is. And for the little narrow pathway that I'm going to talk about today is more about how the fear aspect of our shadow self sort of fades things out and it hides aspects of things that make us uncomfortable, right? The things that we're afraid to bring to the light because they're potentially going to break our constitution. They are going to make us weaker, so therefore we hide them in these places and don't address them. Now, I will say for me, the thing that I most recognize as part of my shadow self is something that I've been saying as a phrase since I think the first early years of high school, in the fact that we tend to dislike in others the qualities we bestow in ourselves. And that can be seen in all kinds of places. It can be seen in, oh, I don't like Betsy because she's rude to the wait staff, when that's a quality that you are a little bit short-tempered or curt with some of the people on a wait staff yourself. And you just simply don't want to address it, but you project some of this discomfort when you see somebody else doing it because you know that you haven't been able to address it for yourself. Or I think of an example in a micro community that I'm a part of if you are not publicly out, but you look to somebody who is, you sort of look down upon them for their particular ability in public awareness status, whereas you are not addressing the fact that you have not been able to achieve that type of status for yourself. And not addressing the shadow self can be felt in ways of, depleted energy. And going back to a service-related example, I think about people who work in the customer service field in general and how they are positioned most to be in this place of feeling they are not able to express a lot of their fears, concerns, angers in a way that allows them to alleviate those stresses in their life because they are forced to consciously bury it and put on this customer service friendly attitude with the next person who comes in. So they are constantly creating this habit during a work hour period to compartmentalize and set it aside. And at the end of the day, of being so exhausted from that, most people tend to not want to take that compartment back off the shelf and unpack it and decategorize the generalizations that everything was swept up in with this feeling of frustration and insufferability from their interactions from the day. as things build and time goes on, we create these habits of storing things away, and we become less and less aware of what we're putting away or what we're exactly uncomfortable about when, you're watching somebody be a little bit short-tempered with the wait staff, or yelling at somebody in customer service, or being able to act in a way that you feel like you can't act in. And when we get further and further away and we lose touch of what that is, the less we are able to then pinpoint it, we become even further away from this target of identifying and processing that self, of facing our fears, of addressing some of the things that may have come from an unpleasant experience or a traumatic experience, or just some types of qualities that we don't really care for in ourselves, because we've been projecting a lot of that dissatisfaction and judgment upon others who are displaying the same qualities. So with talking about the fear factor about where the shadow self can interact with it, as a way to protect and compartmentalize or reserve energy for the things that make us uncomfortable in life or the things that we're afraid of, it does still serve a purpose in our life. And we talk about, the light and the dark, and I'm going to link some articles down below, and I'll even reference maybe a little background about Carl Jung himself. But I think what I want to just briefly and generally talk about as far as some examples about what shadow work can look like and how to ease yourself into it. Because again, for some of us, we're dealing with our shadow self in concepts of fear, and some people we're talking about aspects of creativity. Some people it's anger, their sadness. There are other aspects of what builds and creates the fabric that is woven into the shadow self. I know for me that I have a particular cycle where the shadow self sort of becomes ever present, and I need the outlet of creativity to sort of keep it in check and to help balance myself as I'm processing it. So I'm going to share a little anecdote about myself in this aspect of a little over a year ago. Caleb and I had this heart-to-heart where he sort of identified and addressed how not dealing with my shadow self was affecting him, and how in some ways it feels like there are two sides to who I am that were very distinct, because there are times where it's almost like I'm completely lost in that paralyzed sense of fear of, anxiety, but it's also panic, but it's also I need to think my way out of a problem or an emotional feeling, and that's thinking your way out only gets you sort of so far. And it's sort of what you do with those thoughts, right? So I can come up with a whole bunch of different ideas around what is going on as far as the paralyzing aspects of fear that are very present for me, but how to sort of turn that over into something that's a little bit liberating, to balance a little bit of a light with the shadow. And I will say it was a difficult thing to hear somebody that you love so much talk about this in such a very direct and candid point of view, but also knowing that there held some weight to it, because it was almost like you were calling it out for what it is, for something that you knew yourself, but you weren't able to really call it by its name. And you almost needed that extra support of validation. And that's a lot of what I think this conversation became for me. It wasn't calling me out or judgmental. It was this supportive conversation on how do we balance this in a way that makes us stronger, makes us not have to worry about getting lost in the shadows because you are overwhelmed by the fears that are within, and how to embrace a little bit more of the lighter side of life. And I think that set me on a path of trying to figure out what that is, of doing stuff with the shadow self. And it took me some time to identify that how I used to go through this cycle in the past and how I used to break free of it revolved a lot around the creativity that is also found in there. And over the years, I've been more and more removed from that feeling of being able to access and tap into some of that creativity. I used to be somebody who did a lot of random doodles in a notebook when I was learning something as a way to reinforce some boring ideas if I could pair it with like a funny picture or something that I found a pattern I found interesting on a piece of paper. Or I engaged a lot with music, and both in writing and dissecting the components of other people's work. But in dealing with some of the shadow work, I have tried to expand on it in a more practical way in the last year of I have always been a big note taker and list maker and write in the margins of things and again, doodling on notebooks when I was taking things, and I just taking notes on things. But I have expanded on that in the last year by trying to focus some of my cravings of doodle making and list making into something a little bit more centered. And I've also created a website where I try to focus and explore and write through some of these uncomfortable feelings I have sometimes, or some of the progress I've made in certain aspects as like an online journal aspect. And with the journal, I also have like a regular, emotional journal where I write down, and when I sit down with this particular notebook, that notebook only is for the question of how am I feeling? And sometimes the idea of saying that you are not well and not feeling great it's liberating to be able to say, right? Not a lot of people react well with the whole, I'm not feeling well. You don't like to feel like that limpy gazelle in a herd. You want to hide that feeling. And a lot of cultures also identify this aspect of you're cast out. And nobody wants to be cast out, so you keep that to yourself and you hide it. Since last winter, I've been doing these 2-minute updates on where my head is at a particular time of day. And it's a different type of exercise that works for me of, every day at 7 o'clock, I do 2 minutes and I video record myself where I look directly into the camera and I just talk about whatever's on my mind. And sometimes the thing that comes out of my mouth is not what I think is on my mind. And that is sort of surprising to audibly hear. And then I store these. And in the beginning, it was one of those things where I went back and I would watch myself and re-listen to myself at the end of the week and see how I am. Sometimes it's hard to look your own self in the face and recognize, oh, you are visually in pain or you are plagued by something and you are working through it. And you're able to have an easier time to not regulate, but be able to tap in and tap out of that discomfort, where you experience the discomfort and you don't necessarily feel stuck there, but you also know how to sort of jump in and out a little bit and help to balance out some of the shadow aspects of what your daily life is. I will say that with the 2-minute video recording of myself exercise, it's easier to come back at the end of the week or the end of the month and objectively re-listen to or re-watch some of these things and have this perspective on, is that emotionally where I'm sitting right now? And how far or close am I away from those same things from that same time period, from that distant time period? I will say that by this particular exercise for me, it's something that you can easily take in 2-minute or less, or you can build it up and watch a series of them. And it helps you to become a little bit more, again, visually, but also emotionally aware of where you've come from and where you're at. I will say that by focusing very diligently on a daily basis every day for the last year on shadow work has been a little bit exhausting, but also it's been fun to tap into the creativity around how to approach it. I've given an example about how it's not always a one-size-fits-all type of approach to it. And again, it's allowed me a new way to allow for creativity to work its way into how I do shadow work. When I get to address fears a little bit, I get to sort of tap into, am I writing a regular list? Am I trying to figure out WordPress and put it in a blog post, and then I get to structure it in a certain way? Do I get to put it, just speak it all out and put it away, and I'm not being really mindful in the time that it takes to write something or to pull up a computer and type out something, but I just talk something out in a short 2-minute little clip and then store it away. So today I just wanted to take a quick little opportunity to talk a little bit about shadow work and how I am approaching it and how it can be put into our system of productivity, where if we are trying to have an ease to our day-to-day life and trying to improve things both emotionally but also through our functionality, where we're at with our energy is something that is important. So at the end of the day, if you're fatigued and you don't necessarily know why, and you're uncomfortable and you don't want to know why, it can be a little bit of a roadblock in itself. So, again, I talk about drivers a lot. What's driving you through this process of making more of an efficient system to, lean in and love the life that you're living? And there's also this aspect of the process of, well, we're going to reanalyze and look at some of the things that are the opposite of drivers, where they're the hindrances in the process. And doing shadow work is, I think, an important role in that, of emotionally addressing some of those fears, why things anger you, why somebody makes you uncomfortable, what is a situation that you have a shutdown type of reaction to and you don't necessarily know why, and, again, things deplete your energy. Doing shadow work is a tool that I have been using more and more consciously in the last year, and I will say that it has brought me a lot of good benefits to it. So of course I'd love to know who else uses shadow work as something that you implement in your system's revamp process for these 60 days of creating new sustainable habits. Let me know, or if you have a different way that you approach how you do and address your shadow self, I would love to know new creative ideas on that. I look forward to hearing from you, and I'll share more with you soon. Tschüss.